This is the best of First and Last, the podcast.
Last night, ask and you shall receive, when the entire collective world following the NBA this playoffs sat around yesterday around the campfire and universally took down the NBA for giving us a boring product during the playoffs. And you even had the players coming out, Draymond Green talking about how boring the Eastern Conference playoffs were. Well, this argument works in his favor because last night we finally got what we so coveted, an entertaining game here in the second round of the playoffs. In a world where the two best teams in the playoffs started undefeated, we have a series from what most people thought were the two chief contenders on the Western Conference side really live up to the expectations. The series was tied 2-2. It's the pivotal Game 5 in this series. The Spurs are 13-2 in a series with a 3-2 lead under Greg Popovich, so a big win for them last night. But just how competitive was this game? There were 14 lead changes last night, the most of any conference semifinal game this postseason, and there were more lead changes in overtime, 3, than in 9 of the previous 16 conference semifinal games this postseason so far. And all of that got us to the 110-107 San Antonio win in overtime last night. Now, one of the interesting things of note about that overtime was a noticeable absence from the Spurs side in one Kawhi Leonard, who, perplexing everyone involved, because last night was some of the best of NBA Twitter as well, because when we got that close game finally, we got a way to watch it again in the communal fashion of Twitter. We all got to move through this beautiful dance together. We got the nostalgia of watching Manu Ginobili have a huge night for the Spurs. Tony Parker now out for the rest of the postseason, lost his running mate there in the backcourt, two guys that have been together for so long. Manu stepped up, had to play big minutes, extra minutes, especially down the stretch with Tony Parker out, with Kawhi Leonard out down the stretch, and managed it beautifully. But part of this story is that in those winning moments of the game, we all sat there very confused. Some people even thought, maybe Pop's just trolling us right now. Maybe he's trying to see what he can truly get away with, because Kawhi Leonard was nowhere to be found on the court. And then in overtime, Kawhi Leonard continued to ride the bench. We come to find out after and see in some of the highlights down the stretch that Kawhi apparently sustained an injury, enough of an injury to sit out the rest of the game. And here is his head coach, Greg Popovich, when asked about that injury last night.
Pop, can you tell us what the injury was to Kawhi? Ankle.
Ankle. And we're back. Pop, we've truly missed you and the one-word answers along the way. We'll make that Straight Talk brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. He did, however, feel like expounding on that injury a little later when asked.
Is Kawhi's injury going forward something you have any idea about at this point?
No, of course not.
Okay.
You know, he's had some issues, and you could tell he just before they took a couple shots and he jumped off 1 foot. And he didn't want to come out, obviously, but we let him play a little while just to see what it was going to be like, but it was obvious that he couldn't go. And I think everybody else picked it up very well.
And this is a very Spursian play right here, because most, if you see a guy that's able to physically be out there the way that Kawhi Leonard was, even not at 100%, your superstar player in the waning minutes of a game where we've talked about throughout this playoffs, coaches making the decision to take guys off the court in pivotal moments. Russell Westbrook, a name that comes to mind from the OKC-Houston series earlier in the first round of the playoffs, where we all questioned Scott Brooks and his decision to take Russ off the court just to rest him at different points with everything he was doing, especially late in games, in the elimination game in that series, when you understand what's on the line and what's to play for. And we all understood last night how important this Game 5 was going to be in the way that this series played out with it so close down the stretch. And so for Greg Popovich to have the confidence in his team, and for that Spurs team to just understand that this is the way we do things, where we're going to sit our best player because we just don't believe he's going to be out there at 100%. It's sort of the Marcus Smart mantra where if he's going to be out there not helping the team, why would we have him out there? Why would we put him out there if he's going to be a detriment on the floor because of that injury, where most would just ask their superstar to will their way through it? And instead, we got the complete opposite from Kawhi Leonard. Here was Kawhi Leonard himself speaking about his injury from last night and what it means for him going forward.
A little sore, but my teammates did a good job of closing out that game with me not being able to go that last stretch.
How frustrating?
Ankle.
How frustrating was it for you to sit and watch that during overtime?
It was frustrating because I want to play, but like I said, I was happy seeing my teammates out there putting in a good effort and getting a win.
Pop said you wanted to play, but it was obvious that you needed to come out. How severe is the injury, do you think? Do you anticipate being able to play game 6?
Yeah, I'm going to be able to play.
What kind of treatment did you do after the game?
How did it happen?
Running back in transition.
Oh.
Yeah, and I haven't watched film yet, but I just remember running back in transition and kind of
step on somebody's shoe or something? Or?
I'm not sure. I got to look at the film.
I got to say, this Kawhi Leonard sounds exactly what, I think Greg Popovich wishes his voice could sound like. Like, Pop, for all of his quips and the way that he operates, whether it's in sideline interviews or in post-game press conferences, when he gets going, you can hear the person. He's got a great personality, and it comes out there. Kawhi, on the other hand, is the blank slate. He is the prototype San Antonio Spur, and I just imagine Greg Popovich sitting there listening, beaming with pride on the inside at how bland, boring, and non-committal Kawhi can be in a soundbite. It has to just warm his heart in a way that neither of them will ever speak about publicly, because that's the other thing. The Spurs and their superstars, outside of Pop and Tim Duncan, which we understand was a little bit different, they're like those father and son that don't hug. They just sort of nod walking by each other in the hallway, and that's all the acknowledgement you need of the pride that he beams with there. So, the big answer we did get out of that soundbite, though, on a serious note, was that Kawhi Leonard plans to play Game 6, because as much as this win mattered, it looked like on the surface one of those that could be a win that comes with a loss. Like understanding that, yeah, you might have won the game, but you're going to be set back, potentially your superstar player, in the game coming up next. Kawhi Leonard disputing that now, have the chance as they travel back to Houston to try and get that right in the interim, use some of the treatment he wasn't willing to divulge in that situation, and go from there. So that's the big story coming out of last night. But coming up next, the other side of this is at the end of the game last night, we had one superstar turn back the clock and another give up the rock. We'll tell you who that was next. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
First and Last, the podcast.
Coming up next, the other side of this is at the end of the game last night, we had one superstar turn back the clock and another give up the rock. We'll tell you who that was next. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Producer Dan, you're pretty impressed with me right now, aren't you?
Can we play that one more time? This is us going into our last break. Go ahead.
But coming up next, the other side of this is at the end of the game last night, we had one superstar turn back the clock and another give up the rock. We'll tell you who that was next. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
So to peel back the curtain a little bit, generally we call that a tease in radio. Looking ahead to the next segment, get the listener to stick around, and thank you for those of you who did.
A term in the biz.
A term in the biz. And normally, I write them for Golic. I put it on the screen. I say, hey, here's what's coming up next. And sometimes, you have a little fun with it. You take some liberties. You make it your own.
Exactly. Why not? Make it a little more on brand.
So that was off the cuff. It was incredible. And if you listen very carefully, we'll play it one more time. If you listen very carefully at the end, you can hear Golic smiling because he knows he nailed it. And he was pointing to the ceiling as if he just ripped one into the upper deck. Go ahead.
But coming up next, the other side of this is at the end of the game last night, we had one superstar turn back the clock and another give up the rock. We'll tell you who that was next. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. It really was. I was sitting here in the studio, both hands raised in the sky. I was Lane Kiffin after calling a guaranteed touchdown on the sidelines. Like, I just saw Amari Cooper streaking down, splitting the safeties, and knew exactly what was coming right there and then the minute I let it out. So I'm glad we could stop and bask in that for a moment right there. Eat your heart out, Greeny. The Greek god of teases coming up on Mike and Mike. We take you up until that Memory Monday through Friday right here and try and do him justice with the tease there. And we'll try and pay off the tease now. I mean, we can't celebrate it that much and not give you some love for it on the back end. And let's explain it now. Let's break it down. Last night, part of the beauty of the game last night, one of the cool things about it I mentioned was watching the game on Twitter with everyone. It's one of my favorite things about sports in 2017. But what made it extra cool is, what do we love in the NBA? We love a good little bit of nostalgia. And we had a player give us that in real time last night in Manu Ginobili. 39 years old, going to go on and be a Hall of Famer, 4-time NBA champion, been in the league for 15 years. The Spurs drafted Manu Ginobili when James Harden was 10. When he was 10 years old. And last night, how did he decide to respond? How did he decide to step up in a way where, yeah, Tony Parker, his running mate for the longest time, one of the old guard in that Spurs locker room, down and out for the rest of the playoffs. How does he respond? Goes out there, plays big-time minutes for them, especially down the stretch. Notches a 4th block in his career in a game-tying or go-ahead shot in the final minute of a game. The players he's blocked, Ray Allen, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Love, and now James Harden. And in 15 years, saw this up on ESPN.com, and it's worth noting, you don't get a lot of firsts anymore when you're 39 years old in the NBA. That was the first time he had blocked James Harden in his career. James Harden had taken 862 three-pointers this season, including the playoffs, and only 13 of those had been blocked throughout the year. And it was clean. He picked that thing clean last night. And it was impressive. And that was just really emblematic of the night for Manu Ginobili. Went out there, had 12 points on 5 of 11, but played 32 minutes, which, again, is something he was not accustomed to coming into this game. He's a guy that we're used to seeing be that sixth man for the Spurs and come off the bench and impact the game in a very big way, in an unselfish way that is very, very Spursian, is, again, the word I will continue to beat into the ground. So a big night for Manu. Had the off-foot, wrong-hand dunk come up in the game for him that was impressive. Had some Euro steps. Really dialed back the clock, and if I can speak selfishly for a moment, really has helped pave the way for guys with that cul-de-sac bald spot in a way that few others do in sports. So from someone proudly or not so proudly repping the same team as a 27-year-old Manu, a performance for the ages from him last night. Now, what we had on the other side was equally as interesting down the stretch, and it piqued my interest driving into work this morning, listening to SportsCenter all night, and I hear Stephen A. Smith on SportsCenter last night talking about a situation we saw near the end of the game in overtime. 13 seconds left in the game. James Harden's got the ball and decides to give it up on a shot, and the explanation and the rationalizing Stephen A. Smith went into surprised me a bit. Take a listen here.
Listen, he's tired. He shot 4-15 from three-point range. Didn't have a lot of legs under him, and he's got faith in the shooters around him. You've got Eric Gordon on the floor. You've got Ryan Anderson on the floor. Patrick Beverley had drilled a three a few minutes earlier. You look at guys that have been around him, including Louis Williams, even though he wasn't on the floor at that particular juncture. The fact of the matter is, far more often than not, those other guys have hit shots when James Harden has given them the ball.
Blew my mind right there. Hearing Stephen A. Smith, who's a guy who, listen, one of the best and brightest that we have here. You could argue he's the face of this network, and a guy that's not afraid to be critical of players. Once famously stared into the camera and actually called a player out personally. Said, you don't want to make an enemy out of me. That's Stephen A., though. He's going to unapologetically be him and be critical of guys where he thinks it's warranted. And so to hear him in this situation really go out of his way to protect the decision of James Harden here in a moment sort of perplexes me for a number of reasons. Now, James Harden had a big game for the Rockets last night. 33 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. Became the second player with a postseason triple-double at San Antonio, joining just Magic Johnson, who did it 3 times. But he also had 9 turnovers, which is 2 more than the entire Spurs team, and down the stretch looked gassed. Like, that rest conversation came up a lot during the year. Seemed like he could have used a little more last night. Maybe. Now, it didn't help that the Rockets were playing 7 guys throughout the course of this game, so they were all going to get gassed. And it was a weird matchup game last night because Nene was hurt for Houston, and on the other side, San Antonio was dealing with the injury to Tony Parker. So you had the Spurs really go all in on the big lineup, playing Twin Tower style with Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge. And on the other side, you had Houston go all in on their small ball 3-point mentality. So you had James Harden matched up on LaMarcus Aldridge for weird portions of the night, adding stress, a little more banging on his body than he's used to. And it all seemed to crystallize in the end of the game. James Harden played 43 minutes, which we call an average night for LeBron James at this point. A guy who's markedly older than him, who's also a physical phenom, but worth noting when we start to excuse that for him being tired. And I guess that's the comparison that really shocked me here, is that this is not a luxury that we would afford or did afford to LeBron James or stars of that ilk when they're coming up, when they haven't, quote-unquote, won anything in this league. And at this point, James Harden is one of those guys that, when you look at the resume, hasn't, quote-unquote, won anything in a way that we like to throw at guys early and often in NBA circles.
I mean, Stephen A. referenced a guy who wasn't even on the floor.
Yeah, Lou
That's
Williams.
how much he was reaching to help James Harden out of this situation. That was sort of the shocking part.
Yeah, just pulling whoever he could off the bench at that point to make us understand that, listen, he was going to trust his teammates, which is something that now in a post-LeBron world in clutch moments we seem to have reconciled with a little bit more, because LeBron was just going to keep doing that until we recognized that that was the right thing to do in those moments, or at least that was how he was going to operate. He was going to make the sound basketball play. But James Harden, who checks all the boxes for the guy that we would criticize for being the superstar, being the MVP candidate, and giving it up in that big moment, seems like he was getting let off kind of easy here. And I'll be very interested to see if that's a pattern that persists into today, or if this guy is going to get properly taken to task for being an MVP caliber player, guy that we argued should have been because his team was better than Russ's all year, and get the criticism that he's due.
First and last.
We got some tweets coming in on the 100flowers.com Twitter feed. Justin Coe tweets in, don't want to hear that tired BS. Harden, an MVP candidate, 27-ish years old. This is the playoffs and you're playing for a chip, not an excuse. Get it done. Referencing James Harden, who looked gassed down the stretch and who gave it up in the big moment in overtime last night in a way that Stephen A. Smith somehow still found palatable. Go figure. Matt Harvey, for anyone who may have missed it, was suspended 3 days following an incident where he did not show up at the ballpark for a Mets game, was suspended Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Now, including a start that he was scheduled to make on Sunday, got up and faced the music yesterday. Here was his apology. Let's take a listen.
I do apologize for my actions. I'm extremely embarrassed by my actions. I apologize to my teammates, to the Mets organization, to the Wilpons, all the way down to the Mets fans for doing what I did. And yes, I was out on Friday night, past curfew. I did play golf Saturday morning, and I put myself in a bad place to be ready for showing up for a ball game that is my responsibility. And I take full blame for that, and I've apologized to my teammates. I've apologized to the coaches, and I'm doing everything in my power so that never happens again. And like I've said, I'm extremely embarrassed for my actions, and I'm working forward to getting things back on track and doing everything I can to help this team win and help this organization moving forward. And they all have my word on that one.
That's one of those apologies. It's scripted like every textbook athlete apology of all time. But man, does that read a lot better than it sounds. Like, go and read the transcript, and you're like, all right, he checked all the boxes. He apologized to his teammates. He's committed to being better going forward. All these great things. but it doesn't quite have that Matt Harvey je ne sais quoi until you hear it with a monotone voice that sounds like he truly couldn't care less about what just happened.
Why did he talk about playing golf?
That's the most interesting part about all this to me, is because we get it. Like, listen, Saturday he wasn't going to play. So he showed up late for a game that he wasn't going to play after a long night out in New York. Guy's 28 years old. That was the other thing that kind of blew my mind is, oh, by the way, Matt Harvey's a year older than I am. So I get it. You're going out. You burn it down a little bit. Show up a little staggered. But he had the wherewithal to wake up and play golf that morning. He already made a calculated decision that he was going to get his day going earlier and get on the golf course. How can you then not just drag yourself to the ballpark? Again, you don't even have to get up for a game. You just got to be there after you already got a cool 18 in. That's the part where you really played yourself in all this, Matt, was revealing that detail. Like, that was not vital information.
I almost just wonder, though, in this day and age, if he didn't say that and then some pictures surfaced of him falling out on the golf course at like 9 a.m., it would be a lot worse.
God, that is true. You can't get away with everything now, so you're right. I guess it does behoove you to fully divulge, because usually I'm of the ilk that the outside world as an athlete, because, again, the two different hats that I wear in my life are conflicting, because I enjoy entertaining sounds and circumstances from the world of sports now because I crave them at a cellular level, sitting in a chair where I'm forced to talk about them for 2 hours a day. The athlete in me, the former athlete in me, cringes at that idea. I want the sound coming out from my locker room to be as dull and uninteresting as possible. I don't want events like this to happen. And when they do, I don't always believe that the outside world is entitled to your full truth. I think those things stay behind closed doors. That's in general how I operate it.
Right, but I guess if he stands up there and goes like, look, I stayed out, I wasn't feeling well, we've all been there, I'm in my mid-20s, and then like 3 days later, you see just pictures of him.
Oh, I completely agree, and that's what I'm saying. It goes counter to it, but in this day and age, you have to, because you're right. 3 days from now, that becomes a story again then. If all of a sudden we found out he got up here and lied right to all of our faces and just compounds the situation.
I hate to be that guy, but I'm gonna. It's getting tougher and tougher to be an athlete or a celebrity.
It's tougher in that sense, and I always walk the line with this. So there are certain ways where it's very difficult, because there are certain ways where your privacy is invaded, and that's just built into the expectation. Well, it comes with the territory of being famous. The paparazzi invasion, the way people try and dig into your personal life in certain ways, and this story does have some of that if you start to hear the rumors circulating about just why that night out went as far as it did. Now, none of this is confirmed. It's all just, back channel rumors that you hear at this point, but a certain love interest of his, a former model, was seen out with a past NFL boyfriend of hers, the Met Gala, that apparently, according to some people, rubbed him the wrong way. We have nothing to verify that. No truth, but it's an interesting wrinkle in this, and this is a story that, let's be honest, is sort of harmless to an extent. He missed one start in the midst of a 162-game season. Now, it's going to be a bigger issue going forward of if the Mets can really reconcile this, because Matt Harvey's just not the player he used to be. Like, that's the one thing when we all talk about this, and we hinted at it yesterday. Matt Harvey gets that ERA down a couple. All of a sudden, this is a lot more of a non-issue. But when you're a guy who, personality-wise, tends to rub people the wrong way and has a history of doing that, and all of a sudden that ERA creeps up over 5 the way it is right now, you get a lot of teammates that are going to look at you sideways and be a little less forgiving. Again, you're willing to compromise on a guy being a bit of a jerk at times with the understanding that he's going to go out there and deliver for you in the place that gets you paid. Like, we all get paid when Matt Harvey pitches better and the team does better. There's the trickle-down effect to when your stars go out there and perform, because you understand, as a guy that was in my position as an underling, that you get paid when the team does well, and the team tends to do well when your stars go out and be stars.
Especially for the manager, because we heard Terry Collins yesterday, and we talked a lot about the way Terry Collins kind of handled it, which was, and your point was that this guy clearly is not on the Matt Harvey bandwagon right now, because no one's future is tied more to this team's success than the manager. Because players in baseball especially can go out and get theirs. You can have a terrible season as a team, but if you're hitting 310, you hit 35 homers and drive in 105 in the middle of the order, you're going to get paid.
No, that's very true. That's very true. You're right. So you've got a manager that sort of distanced himself from that. And I'm not going to go down on the sinking ship of Matt Harvey if that's the way that this one goes. But man, the apology was tough. I understand you've got to do it. And you can't, you're right, you can't even give because I would say make it a written statement, but you can't even do that anymore. You've got to get up there. You've got to own the statement. We just understand that it really doesn't sound all that sincere with Matt Harvey, as it usually doesn't with athlete apologies, because in a lot of instances, they don't believe that what they did was all that wrong.
Do you think athletes are mad at Tony Romo for delivering that heartfelt written statement? I know it wasn't an apology per se, but like standing up there with a written statement and reading it and really being emotional and raw made the media and the public kind of go, see, that's what we want. We want that. Give us that.
And you got to give all credit to Tony Romo's ghostwriter, his wife, who apparently is a writer, and who put together that masterful statement that Tony Romo, as the events of the season went on, you kind of saw more and more that statement itself seemed less and less sincere, because this is a guy that, by a lot of reports, clearly still felt like he should be the guy out there and felt slighted by the division in the locker room about who should be starting in that situation, and seemed to hold some resentment, some grudge against the guys reportedly that had been supporting Dak Prescott during all that, but had a great writer, had a great ghostwriter in all this, and you have people putting together these statements for other guys, so Matt Harvey and the rest of the athlete world got to be looking at their PR teams at these teams going, see, why can't we get more of that? Make me look good. But instead, we got what we got last night in a situation that, again, we know isn't really going to matter if Matt Harvey in his next start goes out there, strikes a bunch of guys out, puts the Mets in a winning situation, and gets them wins.
But if he doesn't.
But if he doesn't, then this just continues, and the voices grow louder for what the future really becomes for Matt Harvey in a Mets uniform. And as you look for storylines in a young baseball season, this Mets team in general, but especially that Mets rotation and their former ace, the Dark Knight, Harvey Day himself, is going to factor prominently going forward in the season based on the outcome for this team.
It's not great what the stories that have gotten us to talk about baseball have been thus far, for the most part.
No, it hasn't. Listen, it's right up there with what we saw in the NHL the other day, too, coming out with hockey, where you've got Sidney Crosby going into the boards, and hockey, a sport that we've carved out a niche for here because it feels criminally underrepresented in the media coverage, all of a sudden gets covered, but it's because of a gross oversight on the part of the people designed to protect the players.
First and last.
Some sad news last night, definitely here, and a lot of you guys who may already know this news will recognize the theme song here, but Christopher Boykin, Big Black from Robin Big, the show on MTV that was really popular for a long time. Christopher Boykin and Rob Dyrdek just talking about their friendship and some of their escapades. Unfortunately, Christopher Boykin died last night at the age of 45, a really sad moment, and what seems like a last year and a half where we just have a lot of those strung in along the way. Was a really tough one there, so certainly rest in peace to that guy, a guy that made a ton of people laugh and was such a prominent figure in a lot of childhoods for people around my age there, and just wanted to make note of that. There's no natural transition back to the world of sports, so we move on accordingly, and well wishes to his friends and family and those who knew him there, someone who we watched and got to enjoy for so many years. But back in the world of sports from last night, we were talking before about an apology from Matt Harvey, about the difficulties of navigating the celebrity life when you are an athlete in 2017, and also about the nature of the sincerity of apologies and how difficult they are to pull off in moments when you're a guy with a track record of maybe not being so sincere about these things. A guy with a track record that Matt Harvey has, and it's pretty well known at this point, especially for fans around New York. Another pretty well-known situation is Ray Allen and the disconnect with the rest of the Celtics from that championship team back in 2007, 2008. And it was heightened recently by the segment, the Area 21 that Kevin Garnett does on the TNT as part of the TNT halftime show. The other night brought in a bunch of the former Celtics, had Rondo in there, had Paul Pierce back there fresh off his retirement, Kendrick Perkins, Big Baby Davis, all of these guys gathered around in Area 21. They brought Doc Rivers on in the video conference, which Big Baby looked wholly uncomfortable with, about 4 months removed from publicly calling Doc Rivers overrated. So that was also a wonderful little plot line. But a noticeable absence was Ray Allen from this situation. So, in the very 2012 way of going about things, Ray Allen decides to go for a little clapback, as the kids would say. Comes back at these guys, posts a Facebook picture of him.
Allegedly.
Okay, this is where we start to get into the minutia now. Allegedly posts a Facebook picture of him against the 2008 Celtics. A picture of him, I believe it was right up against Rondo. The caption is actually escaping my mind right now. I don't have it in front of me. Do you guys have what the caption was on this picture? It's not overly relevant, but just for the full context of this story and creating the best picture possible in all this. The power to push limits. And it was a picture of Ray Allen in a Heat jersey draped over Rajon Rondo in apparent response to all of the events in Area 21 and a lot of this renewed conversation about the sour relationship between Ray Allen and the rest of that Celtics team. We had some of this earlier in the season when Rondo was talking about his vets, those guys from that Celtics team, and again, left Ray Allen out of some of that conversation. Now, as our own Rachel Nichols tweeted last night, Ray Allen's publicist told her that Ray's verified Facebook page was hacked and that he didn't post a Celtics clapback pic. And that Facebook unverified the page while this investigation is ongoing. Ray Allen, another in a long, guys, getting hacked, also prompted a response from his former Celtics teammates. Worth hearing their voice on this one as well before we get to how to solve this whole nature of the athlete claim of being hacked.
When Ray decided to go to the Heat, I feel like he moved on. And he went to pursue another ring, and he got another ring. Shout to him. And that's it. You know, it wasn't no other Wizards. It wasn't no other Spurs. It wasn't no other Heat. It wasn't nobody. It was all Celtics invited to this.
I think I would have even took it better if he has just talked to us about it. I don't know how his relationship was with Doc. It was kind of souring at the time because Avery was getting more minutes, and so I can understand all that. But I just felt like we should have had a conversation.
If Ray want to make amends with anybody up here or whatever the case, I think it's on him to reach out and say, hey, P, I handled this wrong, man. We better than this. Hey, Ticket, I handled this wrong. Hey, Big Baby, I handled this wrong. Hey, Rondo, I handled this wrong, man. And just get it past us, man. We won games together, man. We did a lot of things over time together.
Should be noting that I misspoke. This was what Ray Allen's post was in response to.
Allegedly. The post, I should say the post on Ray Allen's page. That way we can escape all of the allegedly language here. So that was what it was allegedly in response to, were those statements, which, by the way, if you're looking to bridge this gap, Kendrick Perkins seems like the guy to do it. You heard him talking there. He's already talked about how he's been a part of mending Russ and KD's relationship. Perk needs to step up to the plate on this one and Dr. Phil this. I want an awesome nickname that people refer to me as just in the context that we just heard, where he's like, hey, Ticket. That was awesome.
He was real smooth with it, too. Kendrick Perkins had the best portion of that soundbite going away, but you're right. We're lacking in nicknames around here. Maybe we'll come up with a better one than producer guy Dan Z for you one day.
Like, I know that's KG's nickname. I just didn't realize how ubiquitous it was, that, like, that's how people actually address him in person.
Well, and they're also teammates. Like, when you've got something that's a go-to like that was clearly just a reflex for him. That was how he clearly always referred to Kevin Garnett.
That's what I mean. Like, yeah. I figure something like KG, but I was actually a little shocked to hear him just be like, hey, Ticket.
That is a particularly awesome example, too. But back to the matter at hand. So we've got the hacking claim that comes from this. Here's my thing. In 2017, we're all a little too familiar with what real hacking actually looks like. We live in a day and age where this is a reality that affects a lot of life outside of the world of sports. So do we think all of a sudden that hackers, because when you hear that word, you automatically associate it with big-time hacking, are coming to athletes' Twitter and Instagram and Facebook pages to make nuanced, relevant posts in response to public criticism of that player? My answer is no. That is completely ridiculous. So we need to stop using the term hacking. You need to make this relatable, and you need to speak the language of the people involved here. Because listen, what have we all had? We've all had at some point in our lives, in the day and age now we exist in with social media, we've had a friend who either our computer, our phone was left open, who got onto one of our social medias, and who posted something to get some laughs out of people. That's how you've got to phrase this going forward if you're any of these athletes. Hey, sorry, a friend got into my phone, posted from my page, won't happen again, because then we immediately all go, oh, we can understand that, we can sympathize with that because we've been there. Stop using hacking, a trigger word right there. You've triggered the entire audience once you throw that word into the ring because we know better. It's not that serious. This ain't the Fancy Bears. We're not hacking Olympic athletes.
First and last, the podcast.
JBT, our board op, shipping up to Boston, moving on from the Rangers' loss in the NHL last night and focusing all his efforts now on the NBA playoffs and the Boston Celtics.
I understand that as producer guy Dan Z, as I have a weird assortment of favorite teams, but liking a Boston team and a New York team, I'm not cool with it. And I know I have no room to talk as someone who roots for the Rangers, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Cincinnati Reds, and the Miami Dolphins, but none of those teams conflict.
No, I'll give you that much. It is a random, complete hodgepodge and mishmash of teams that really is a story and an explanation that we're going to need at some point on another day. Great job verbally font. So what we've got at play right now, too, is during the break, we're talking about fonting verbally better as we introduce producer guy Dan Z when his voice comes up. Had someone on Twitter refer to him as the other voice. The other voice is producer guy Dan Z and also JBT on our boards right now, the Boston and New York fan in all of this. But you've got Dan now lobbying behind the scenes to try and get his name on the show in the same way that Stu Gatz has. The Dan Levitard show with Stu Gatz. Dan Z's essentially lobbying for First and Last with Mike Golic Jr. with producer guy Dan Z.
Only for the betterment of the show. This has
yeah.
nothing to do with me trying to get famous or get money, anything.
No,
just for the show.
No illusions of grandeur. No ego in here at all. Purely for the betterment.
We check our egos at the door, Mike. You know that.
That's true. It's what we do first and last around here. That's how we operate. I'm going to abuse the power of that party horn, too. Moving on. Dan Z's illusions of grandeur aside, a potential name change for the show that I'm going to make sure does not happen. We had a situation in the NHL the other night, no laughing matter. So, for anyone that may have missed it, in the Penguins game against the Capitals the other night, Sidney Crosby took a pretty hard spill into the boards, head first, got shoved from behind, was getting up slowly. And for a lot of people, raised alarms because not 6 days before, Sidney Crosby had dealt with a concussion. No concussion protocol for him during the course of this game, wasn't looked at by anybody. And that raised some eyebrows in a way that doesn't usually happen with hockey because hockey tends to fly under the radar in general. That's why we have the hockey guy segment here, because it's a sport that feels underreported in the national media in a lot of ways. But when it's your highest profile player, the star of your league, the way that Sidney Crosby is, people are going to stand up and notice when things happen a little more, and it's the playoffs, the best time of year in the NHL. And so when it's marred by a moment like this, and now you dig into it a little deeper, the way we found out about the NHL's concussion policy and the way they operate the games, boy, what a sham this is in the way they're dealing with this. And in a way, for as much as people want to come out and listen, it's the most high-profile league in the country. It affects a lot more people, especially because at the youth level, you've got just tons more people. So I get it. The scope and size of the NFL warrants a lot of the attention in the way it does. But, man, people want to talk about how backwards the NFL is dealing with this stuff. NHL says, hold my beer. The NHL before, Gary Bettman's come out and talked about gaps in the research and refusing to really acknowledge the connection between head trauma and chronic, and CTE in the way that the NFL has, again, been taken to task for in years past. But now it's doubled down, so we find out that the NHL's use of independent spotters, which they put in before the season to kind of mimic what the NFL has done, really is basically just a shadow operation that gives these guys almost no power in it. We heard about the mechanism of injury. So the deputy commissioner of the independent spotters, Billy Daly, explained why no one stepped in when Sidney Crosby was slow to get up, and his quote was, "Depending on the mechanism of the injury, slow to get up doesn't trigger mandatory removal. The protocol has been interpreted literally to mandate removal. Ice as compared to boards is in there for a reason." So if his head were to hit off the ice, it would have been removable, but not going off the boards. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that even if it had been, really, the NHLPA is now looking at this because when asked, he also said the two spotters in the NHL game aren't required to be certified athletic trainers and aren't even given the power to remove a player from the ice, period, in all of this, unlike the NFL. The in-arena spotter has no power to remove the player from the game. And the team's athletic trainers, the team's personnel, are given the final say on what happens to the player, which we know, because of the way we've dealt with this in the other sport, is it presents a conflict of interest when you want a guy, especially your star in Sidney Crosby, to make sure he's on the ice for you in these moments. And so now you've got the NHLPA reviewing the incident. A union spokesperson told USA Today Sports. But they're going to check and see this week and talk to the spotters for training purposes. This is something they're going to have to amend going forward, because if we're shining a light on this now and it doesn't change, then you can't tell me we're really serious about this on any level. This is an embarrassment for the NHL on their biggest stage with their biggest player, and it's something they're going to have to address. And hopefully they will, because it's an embarrassment.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.